going?
It's going good, thank you.
Good.
It's early in the morning for me, so I'm still kind of waking up, but I will just grab my tea.
Are you in Washington?
Yep, I'm looking out at the Olympic Mountains and Puget Sound. It's very nice.
Sounds beautiful with your cup of tea. Oh my gosh. Okay, your time is precious. So thank you for taking the time to talk to us. I am just gonna like dive right in. You
Great.
have had this incredible career. I was like doing the math this morning, and you first traveled to Europe when you were 14 in 1969. I mean, what, 56 years ago? And then you went back 4 years later. You just graduated from high school,
Yep.
and you've said that that trip to Europe was, like, to this day, your best trip to Europe. Tell me about that. Like, why is that?
Well, that was the first time I went to Europe without being on my mother's passport. Back then, you could actually have a passport with the mom and the kid on the same photograph, and the kid had to just stay with the mom. That was just horrible. No, I loved traveling with my parents when I was really little, but it was to be able to go to Europe without a safety net, to be able to fly away from home on that airplane as a teenager with very little money and a continent to explore was a thrill. I was with my best buddy from high school, and this was your typical Europe on $5 a day, but we had like $3 a day plus our Eurail passes. And back then you could do it. And this was when I was just celebrating having finished high school. I had no interest in researching like I do now. Now when I travel, I'm very very productive, and I've got local guides helping me out, and I'm taking notes everywhere, and I'm producing. For me, right now, my sort of mantra is content is king. I want to bring home content. But back then, my mantra I think was just new experiences and fun is king, and we were just Europe was our playground. Back then, you going to Europe was communicating with people back at home was very very expensive and difficult. You just really didn't do it much. My parents were nervous about my safety, so they wanted me to send a postcard home. And I said, well, I can't do that every day. I'll do it every other day. And I said, and you'll have to pay for the stamps because I don't have enough money for that. So it gave my mom and dad a little comfort to know that every other day I would send a postcard home. And I did diligently. And as if I vanished, they would know where the postcard stopped coming from and they could go over there and find me. It gave them a little false comfort. But the trip was just so full of experiences and learning and memories and fiascos and eurekas, and everything was new. I had heard about the mermaid in Copenhagen, but I had never seen her. I had heard about the Leaning Tower and the Eiffel Tower and Big Ben, but I had never seen them. And now I was there. It was I had heard about crepes, and I had heard about escargot, and I had heard about bullfights. Now I could go to a bullfight and actually go out back after the bullfight. I remember when they always process the bull that dies so they can use the meat. And I remember I actually purchased the horns of the bull. And I thought, well, that's kind of exciting. And I carried around the horns of the bull with me for a couple of weeks until they got so stinky and covered with bugs I had to leave them behind. But that was just the adventures of a green, poor little street urchin backpacker.
Not a street urchin. Oh my gosh.
We would put our money out on the bed every week or so, and we'd count our money, and then we'd divide it by how many days we had left, and we'd see what our daily budget would have to be so we didn't run out of money.
I mean, do you think you could still have a trip like that today? Is that possible through Europe? That kind of sort of classic backpacking experience?
I meet kids that are taking that trip after they're done with school and so on, and they're doing it on $40 or $50 a day now instead of $3 a day, but they're still doing it, and it's hard to rough it like we used to rough it, but they're still doing it, and we're all wealthier now. Even kids are wealthier. We have higher standards. We have more infrastructure to take advantage of. There's more information than there used to be. So it'll never be quite the diamond in the rough kind of travel, but it's still there. And I love it when I meet young people who are doing that kind of trip. And I marvel at it, to be honest. I just go, that is so cool. Tell me more.
You said now when you're traveling, it's very much you're thinking that content is king. And I know you've journaled forever. You've sent the postcards home. You've kept some postcards. Do you get to actually enjoy your trip? Or are you sort of really focused on getting the content? I mean, you write books, you host a
Yeah.
podcast, you've got a TV show.
You know, it's an odd thing. I enjoy my work so much that I don't really crave a vacation. I was going to say need a vacation, but I probably do need a vacation. But I don't crave a vacation. I feel like the metaphor that always comes to me is I'm breathing straight oxygen when I'm in Europe doing my work. And for me, good travel is connecting people with people. Part of the joy of my work is I really like little mom and pops. My mom and dad, they had a mom and pop travel shop in my little town here. And I just love entrepreneurs and people that have a passion and things that have personality. To be honest, more than the chain fast food store shop in the strip mall, you know. And Europe is, in, you can go through an entire town in Europe and it feels like everything is just mom and pops. And I get to sort through the mom and pops and connect them with the mom and pops who have my guidebook, and it's a celebration.
How do you make those kinds of decisions? Like what goes into the guidebook, what goes on the show and the podcast, and like what doesn't make the cut?
That's core to my work, and I'm lucky that I really can empathize with the traveler who is overwhelmed and bamboozled and confused and doesn't know what ends up. I thrive on that kind of situation. I laugh at myself. And then I sort it out and I go through the whole process that the traveler, the curious traveler with no previous experience there, will go through. And I can help the traveler preemptively get the lay of the land so that when they do come, they're more organized and they have a better time and spend less money. So when I'm over there, I'm just thinking somebody needs to figure out where do I leave my bag, because nobody wants to spend the night here, but I got to leave my bag somewhere. So there's my challenge. So I have to research that. And then you're going to get a bicycle. Okay, can you take it onto the boat, or do you have to go down the river and back up the river? Can you take it onto the lift? These are logistical challenges that I'm all over that. That's kind of what I'm good at, I think, is recognizing, oh my goodness, this line is forever to get into St. Mark's Basilica in Venice. And 1 out of every 10 tourists, it seems, has a bag that's too big, and they're told they can't go in. So they wasted an hour, and then they meet the guy at the gate to the church and says, you can't go in with that bag. So then I learned that, maybe from my own mistake, and I will explain that in the book. And then I've got to find out, okay, if you've got a bag that's too big, where are you going to put it? And 100 yards away, there actually is a place where you can leave the bag. And if you park your bag there and you pay the little fee, you actually have a receipt that lets you go to the front of the line and go straight into the church. That's a great tip. And people who have my book, if they've got the Rick Steves guidebook to Italy or Venice, they'll tell me that tip alone saved me an hour in standing in that line, and that merited purchasing that book. A guidebook is a $25 tool for a $3,000 experience, and if it's any good, it's going to pay for itself on the first day of your trip. I'm just like going through Europe, picking up wonderful little moments like that, little practical tips, and it's really fun for me.
Do you ever get nervous that you're going to send somebody to, let's say it's the backpack spot, right? Like I need to put my bag down. Maybe there are a couple of different spots near the Vatican. That line is terrible. Do you ever worry that the one that you suggest could end up like scamming people, or maybe you suggest one that's going to get way too many people? Like sort of how do you make that kind of decision about where to suggest?
I'm very skeptical about anything that sounds too good to be true, and I tell that to my researchers. If it's too good to be true, next year there'll be different people at that desk. Is this really reliable information? We've got to be conservative about not putting that in the book unless it's pretty reliable. But it's not foolproof, and good travelers have to understand that. But I'm pretty good at knowing that if it's a mom and pop, you're going to have the same people staffing it year after year. It's going to be people that are on a team. They have esprit de corps. They have a mission. If it's a chain you're going to have people that are just low-paid workers that come and go all the time with absentee management, and it's not going to be reliable next year. And you can't talk to the boss. The boss is not there. You can't get near the boss because it's a chain, uh, and they can't have a human kind of approach to their business. But the little mom and pop place, they're going to be there. They're going to be there next year, and they appreciate the business I send them. I look that person in the eye and say, the best way you can make me happy is make my readers happy, and they get it. And well, if they get it, we have a relationship that can last literally decades, and I can send them a quarter of their business after if it works well.
Have you ever sort of regretted a decision, regretted a suggestion?
Oh yeah, and then they're out of the book the next year. If a place goes sour, I take it out of the book, and it's tough for me because there's a lot of cases where I have very good friends that run a place, or not. There's people I really like, but something goes wrong, and it's no longer a good recommendation, and I have to put my friendship with them aside because my loyalty. I'm a hired hand of the people who buy my books.
Lots of people travel the world, have a lot of suggestions in mind for other people. But was there a moment when you realized that you were the right person to guide others?
Yeah.
Sort of make that crossover from just a traveler who minds their own business and has a great time to sort of a professional helping others along the way.
Yeah, it was an interesting evolution because at first I was just I was a piano teacher, and my kids would not practice in the summer. And I'm not going to fight this. I'll see you in September. I'm going to Europe, So I would go to Europe. I didn't have a lot of money, and I was learning from my experience, taking my summer breaks in Europe. I remember a moment which was very interesting for me as a teacher. I was in Oslo, changing money at a bank, and I changed $100 with five $20 traveler's checks back in the day of traveler's checks. And I counted my crowns, and I was missing about $15 worth of crowns. And I said, what's going on? I should have more here. And they say, oh, well, in Norway, we charge $4 commission per check, not per transaction, but per check. And they said, next year, rather than 520s, you should bring a $100 check, and you'll save 4 fees. You follow me?
Mm-hmm.
So I thought, oh, see, that's my stupid mistake. It was my problem, my lack of experience. So the next year, I went back to that same bank in Oslo with a $100 check instead of 520s, and I got only 1 fee instead of 5 fees. And I saved $15, which is a big deal for somebody that's on a tight budget back then. And the woman in front of me, the American traveler in front of me, had 5 $20 checks, you see. And I thought, this is a shame. I learned from the School of Hard Knocks, and now she's got to learn from the same School of Hard Knocks. Why can't I package the lessons I learned from my experience into a book or a lecture or something so people can learn from my mistakes rather than their own, have a better trip? And I would have a good excuse to go back to Europe every year and update my material. So that's what I do, just catching butterflies of good ideas for travelers. And then I write them up and type them into my laptop. So that was a practical skill. And then there's the discoveries. And I remember I went to this, everybody goes to Stonehenge. And I went to Stonehenge, and it was a disheartening experience. Barbed wire, tour groups, porta potties, crowds, crass tourism at Stonehenge. And I then said, I want to find my own private Stonehenge. And I was in Dartmoor in southwest England as a young backpacker, and I stayed in a youth hostel, and I hiked to this mystical stone circle. It wasn't as big as Stonehenge, but it was all mine, just me and goats and sheep and wind and moss and rain. And I hiked,
God.
and I hiked, and I hiked, and I found this stone circle, this legendary stone circle, and I was all alone there with the winds of the past. And I sat down there. And I wrote. I remember, I don't know if this is poetic or just silly, but I thought, I'm dipping my pen into the cry of the birds, and I'm capturing this experience. And I thought, nobody knows about this place. Everybody's going to Stonehenge because it has a promotional budget. And I thought I could write up what I call back doors. And then later on, maybe on that same trip, it was way back in my early days, I discovered the Cinque Terre on the Italian Riviera, the most beautiful part of the coast of Italy. And I discovered my favorite village in the Swiss Alps, Gimmelwald. Everybody goes to Grindelwald, the one with the big promotional budget, the fairy tale town. So touristy, mass tourism. Nobody even knows about Gimmelwald. And Gimmelwald has been such a big deal for me. And Cinque Terre, the Italian Riviera villages, 5 villages, has been a big deal. And then I realized I've got a critical mass of these discoveries that I call backdoors, whether it's the alternative little fishing village on the south coast of Portugal instead of the famous resort, you know, and so many special places that I discovered that had no crowds at all. And I thought, if I could just write a book, the first half of the book would be essentially the notes of my lecture that I give about how to travel smartly with the skills. And the second half of the book would highlight my 20 favorite discoveries, what I call the back doors. That'd be a cool book. And that was my first book. It was self-published. It was called Europe Through the Back Door in 1980 when I was 25 years old. And that really kicked off my career. When you write a book, even if it's a worthless book, you get more credibility. People think, oh, he's an author, you know.
I mean, I love the idea of the back door, right? But I also wonder, like Cinque Terre today, right? Hardly back door. And it
Right.
feels like that happens everywhere, right? Like no
Yeah.
matter, we all want to feel like we're off the beaten path, we're away from the tourists,
Yeah.
like we're doing our own thing. But do you ever feel like just by going somewhere new and recommending it, you're about to send a flood of other people, of new people there and sort of perpetuate the same cycle of over tourism?
Yeah, I've got 50 or 60 books covering all of Europe, and I highlight these little odd places. And there's a handful of cases where I do have a noticeable impact. The places I just mentioned, well, Cinque Terre, as you know, is full of tourists now. And the cruise companies have found out about it, so they're selling excursions there. And that's the beginning of the end right there. But and a village up in the Alps. But generally, I have a backdoor approach to regions and cities and second cities and villages that just helps people enjoy it in a more intimate way as a temporary local instead of seeing tired cultural cliches on stage. So I don't worry about it too much. When it comes to the Cinque Terre, it used to be a very poor part of Italy with almost no hotels, no fine restaurants, no place to leave your bag. It was just a bunch of bed and breakfasts and hikers and little tiny humble restaurants. It was great. I just absolutely loved it. So I started sending people there, and other people started sending people there. Now it's a quite wealthy part of Italy. The towns are filled with tourists. All the locals are happy because they're rich all of a sudden, and all the tourists who are there are really happy. It seems like, except for those complaining about the crowds. And I go there, and somebody corners me and they say, "Why did you tell everybody about this? Why didn't you just tell me?" You see, that's the thing. I can't just tell one person. It's either I keep it a secret or I tell everybody. And I'm really not interested in keeping secrets. I'm like the whaler who screams, "Quick, harpoon it before it's extinct." It's kind of crass, but my job is to find these places and to send my readers there and try to get my readers traveling in a way that they are welcome as part of the party instead of part of the economy. Um, and I think that my kind of travelers are a blessing for towns, whereas the stampede in and take a few photographs and stampede out people on these blitz tours, they're the kind of tourism that hurts towns. People who come thoughtful and respectful of the culture and spend a couple of nights and buy dinner, they're welcome. But the people who side trip in and side trip out on a tour bus or, you know, crowd into the city from the cruise ship. There's 3,000 tourists on a cruise ship. That becomes people just put up with it. And the tourists are actually, if the locals get frustrated, they start throwing fruit at them, you know. That's a bad scene. And that's a whole other issue. But yeah, my job is to help people minimize the crowds. And I contribute to it a little bit. But it's pretty simple. If you're standing in a long line, it's your problem. It's your fault. There's lots of Europe without lines, and if you don't want lines, you don't need lines. You just choose to go to a place right now that was in a J.K. Rowling's book, and everybody's going there because it's trendy. That's your problem. Also, I'm really into what I call second cities. You know, everybody goes to Edinburgh. What about Glasgow? Everybody goes to Lisbon. What about Porto? Everybody goes to Paris. What about Lyon? Everybody goes to Dublin. What about Belfast? Of course, you got to go to Dublin and Edinburgh and Paris, but you could also really make your trip a lot more exciting by splitting that time and spending more time in these edgy, industrial, newly arrived towns that don't have tourism and give you a warmer welcome and lower prices and more creative little one-off restaurants and street art and this kind of thing. So there's a lot of ways to enjoy Europe without the crowds. But Americans, a lot of times, their own worst enemy. We go to the same places at the same time, and we let crowdsourcing information shape our priorities. And then what we're just doing is getting into that whirlpool of overcrowded sites. We're working very hard now in all of our books at highlighting places that let you avoid the crowds, because crowds are just going to get worse as social media becomes more impactful.
You've seen how we travel evolve through the decades, but also how travel is covered and people learn about it completely change. And it does, I often sort of struggle with this, where I think even a few years ago, I could write a travel story sort of suggesting things to travelers without necessarily thinking about the impact for the people who live there, sort of beyond economically, right? I think economically, it's like you're going to get a ton of traffic and you'll make a lot of money from it. And that's a win sort of for the traveler and the business. Now it does feel like we need to think more about sort of the longer term effects for the people who live there. And I am wondering, I hear you when you say, go to a second city, go to Lyon. You can see Paris, but maybe spend more time somewhere else in France. But people will definitely go to Paris, right? But now we're sending all of that traffic to Lyon. Same thing with Portugal. I love Lisbon and I love Porto, but Porto will be overrun in the next couple of years. Is there a next solution to this? Is there another solution that's not just second cities? And what's our responsibility as journalists in sort of guiding people through these travels?
Well, just to explain to people that the choices you make determine the crowds you endure. A big part of it is, when do you go? Do you go peak season or do you go off season? I love off season travel. You can go to the most crowded places in Europe in the off season, in the winter, and just dress well, and there's no crowds. You walk right in. I mean, they charge to go to the Pantheon now in Rome, but in the winter, I don't believe they charge. I think it's just open and it's empty, and it's still the Pantheon. You can go to the Acropolis in Athens with no crowds in the off season. As we always like to say, there's no bad weather, just inappropriate clothing. And I don't know why people insist, or even in the case of one day, if take the Acropolis in Athens, for example, it is jam-packed from 10 till 4. And it's open, I forget exactly, but it's open till 7 o'clock probably.
Yeah, and it opens at 8 a.m. I went this time last year. I was the first person in line, and I basically had the place to myself. It was incredible. So, I mean, the crowds ruin it for us when we're visiting. Do you think they're ruining it for the people who live there?
They grin and bear it just because it's part of the economy. I mean, certain people have a bad attitude about tourism, but tourism is really important for the economies in much of Europe. We're a major employer, a major source of revenue. And when tourism is down, the economy is down for a lot of these towns. I think it's a terrible thing for your society to become reliant on tourism. But most people that are just interested in, stoking their economy, they welcome the tourists. They do not welcome people that come in and stampede through and buy a postcard and a popsicle and then leave. That's the worst kind of tourism. And that's what people are getting angry with when it comes to Venice and Barcelona and so on. But if you're spending the night and buying dinner, you're a quality traveler. And if you can then visit places that aren't so crowded, make the reservations in advance like you should, and do things in off times, I'm not worried about the crowds. In the old days, there was not enough information. Now there's too much information, and it needs to be curated. Too many people are just trying to make a quick buck when it comes to travel information. And I think it's really important to know that you need to have something that is thoughtfully written and artfully written by somebody who really knows what they're talking about. That's my approach to a place that I've never been to before. I equip myself with a good guidebook, expect myself to travel smart, and I do. Not because I'm a great traveler, it's because I understand the value of using good information.
Well, I mean, on that topic, it does feel like so much of travel advice now, and travel journalism even, is listicles and TikTok videos. Lots of influencers in the space, and
isn't the reward for that is the more clicks you get, right?
Yep.
So what I know, if I say a certain word, it's going to get more clicks, and I don't pay myself in clicks, so I'm not susceptible to that. But if you're working in a world where it's all about clicks and your pay is all about clicks, then you're going to put those key words in the title so you get more clicks.
Yeah.
We're just human beings, If it's sexy or if it's edgy or if it's gossipy, it gets a little more clicks. So as a consumer of information, it's important to enjoy that, I suppose, but also to realize that there's a lot of good information that is not clickbait, and I think that's it appreciates an attention span. I love to buck this conventional wisdom these days that people can't read more than something quick on the internet. I'm all about long form. I've got two books for each of the cities in Europe. There's the comprehensive guide to Paris, and there's the best of Paris. And the comprehensive guide will be fine print and almost no color, and the other one will be punchy, less words, more charts, more photographs. And it's not right or wrong, it's just two market segments. And my publisher reminded me, if you don't have a book for each market segment, you're only reaching half as many people, and it's your choice.
Okay. That's an interesting way of positioning it. I was going to ask you sort of how you differentiate how you see yourself differently than sort of the influencer ecosystem we're in now. Do you think of yourself as an influencer?
No, I don't. I don't even. I mean, I could probably figure out what that is, but influencer. What's that? What is an influencer? I mean, I know what it is, but what motivates an influencer? To influence people, not to teach people, but to influence them. I'm a teacher. If you ask me what you are, an influencer or a teacher, I'm a teacher. I go over there, I make mistakes, I love what I'm doing, I love what I'm teaching, I'm mission driven, and I'm not trying to influence you. I'm trying to share with you what turns me on so it can turn you on.
Yeah.
So I'm a turn oner.
I like that, a turn oner. A lot of these influencers also call themselves content creators. So I love that you were talking about gathering content. So, because I think a lot of people my age and younger sort of think of content gathering, content creation as like a strictly digital pursuit to make short videos. Right. We think of it in a very narrow scope. I love that for you, it's the journaling, the postcards, the books, all of these things. So I would love to have you like read from a journal. Did you happen to bring anything along for that?
I've got my hippie book here. This is
awesome.
my newest book.
I am reading it right now.
Oh, you got it right there. Oh, that's so cool. This book is written almost directly. It's been edited to not be so many trips to the toilet and so much of a travel log like I had breakfast here, and so on. But it is right from my journal, a 60,000 word journal that I wrote when I was 23 years old, years before I wrote my first real travel book. This was just my personal journal for me. It got hidden away for 40 years. And with COVID, I had some time on my hands. I found this journal and I read it. And I mean, when you look at the beautifully written pages, I don't know who wrote this. It was me, but I don't have penmanship like that. You can't read my writing now, but that was just great writing.
I love this.
And I was passionate about this, but it was only for me. And then I discovered it during COVID and I read it and I thought, God, this is dang good, And it was,
you're like, who wrote this?
Who wrote this? And it's unguarded. It's kind of, I gotta say, it's sort of a diamond in the rough.
I'd love for us to hear like one excerpt.
Yeah, I could read you. I can read a couple of little excerpts here. Let's see. I was in Yugoslavia when there still was a Yugoslavia, and I wrote this. In Belgrade, after being unable to find an affordable hotel. Okay, that's just kind of the title of it. We settled in for the night on a train that looked like it hadn't moved in weeks. Within moments, we found the sleep we craved. Then, kabam! Lurching forward, the unthinkable happened. and the train trundled into darkness, going we didn't know where. Okay, so that was just led up to a bit where we actually jumped out of the train at a moving suburban train station and tumbled into this night watchman's world with a lantern. He let us sleep there on the floor, and then we went back into the town the next day and took a train where we wanted to go. Here's another example in Herat, the first city we stopped at in Afghanistan. Leaving the wedding party as things started dying down, we took a nighttime walk. Mingling was a bit intensified. I didn't know if it was because of the hashish or because I was in a very good mood, but I was tickled by little things, like a man weighing tomatoes. Hustlers became playful. The sun had gone down and lanterns came on. Chariots with torches charged through the darkness. Herat is small, but it really doesn't matter because no street is ever the same if you walk through it a second or a third time. I remember just walking through those streets was amazing.
I have so many more questions for you, but I know I have to let you go. So could I ask you, I know over the summer you shared that you had been diagnosed with prostate cancer, and I wanted to ask how you're feeling now.
Prostate cancer is no fun, that's for sure, but it's also not very rare. And I've been public about it because I just have all my life I've just thought we shouldn't keep things private to our own lives that matter for us and people in our community. We're all in this together. I'm 69 years old. I had never spent a night in a hospital that I remember until now. And 2 months ago, I had my prostate removed with a beautiful robotic surgery. And I decided I'm going to tackle this like I go on a trip. I don't speak the language. I've never been there before. I want to be curious. I want to be positive. I want to learn from it. I want to be thankful. And that's how I've addressed this. And I've let people know the importance of people who should be aware of what's going on in their body to just be good stewards of your body, know what's happening. I should have had this checked earlier, but I was just too busy living. And I'm lucky I've caught it. I just had my lab reports in, and I'm reasonably confident that I will be cancer-free. And if I'm not, we've got technology that I can be a beneficiary of, and I'll be okay. But all of that, when you go public, you realize how many people are thankful that I can set an example of we shouldn't be sloppy and we shouldn't be ashamed, and all of us are in this together. And all the prayers and the good thoughts and the warm thoughts I've got, they're almost like they take on a tangible force. And if I think of this as a journey, it's like a sailboat, a part of my life, and it's those prayers and warm thoughts that are filling the sails as I go through it.
I was reading that article in People over the weekend, and there's this photo of you smiling big, like the Rick Steves I know from TV, in the hospital. And you talked about sort of taking on cancer with a traveler's mindset. And I just want to talk a little bit more about that in terms of like your health, but also just as a parting word, like how do we all move through life with a traveler's mindset?
Well, fear is for people who don't get out very much. The flip side of fear is understanding, and we gain understanding when we travel. I don't like to be fearful. I like to be engaged. I like to be curious. I like to be positive. I like to feel myself as part of a community. I like to get out of my comfort zone. I like the thought that I can learn more about my home and myself by leaving home and looking at it from a distance. We live in a beautiful world, and I think my favorite souvenir, because of my travels, is that the world is filled with good people. It's filled with love. It's filled with joy. Of course, there's bad news and trouble. We see that in the news. And I think that the best way to live your life and the best way to be safe is to have bridges instead of walls. And that's sort of a byproduct of travel and getting to know the world and addressing your fears by going there and meeting the enemy. This is all just beautiful stuff about travel. And my most valuable experiences on the road have been when I get out of my comfort zone, whether I know it or not. I mean, my book on the Hippie Trail celebrates that as a little 23-year-old kid coming of age in places that are, as far as my parents were concerned, behind the dark side of the moon. Will he be okay? And I was okay, and it has been a blessing in my life that I have drawn upon now for, how many years is that? That's 45 years or something like that. Our travels can really, really carbonate our lives and give our outlooks a lot more meaning and make life, I think, just more rewarding and vivid. And as an American travel writer, if I can help Americans venture beyond Orlando, I think I think I'm doing a service, and I think the feedback I get from my travelers bears that out. The world's a great place, and when somebody tells me have a safe trip, I tell them have a safe stay at home, because where I'm going is safer and much more rewarding than where you're staying.
Thank you so much.
Okay, I hope to talk to you again sometime, either on my show or on your show, okay?
Perfect. We'll do it again. Thank you.
Thanks. So nice to see you again.
You too. Bye.
Bye-bye.